Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for this discussion. This is day 2 of SiGMA Malta 2023 and it's our second discussion. We had another one yesterday which focused around the payments and banking. Today we're going to delve into the technology side of things. I have 3 new guests today joining me. Between them, they have obviously many years of experience in cybersecurity and IT, so I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting conversation. I'll go straight into introducing them. So we have Nick Tonna, who is the Chief Customer Officer at BMIT, IT Manager of Retail International Group, and Konrad Kirkop, who is an information security professional within the gaming industry. Okay. So we'll get right into the questions. I'm going to start with you, Nick. So obviously there has been a change in companies moving away from on-premise solutions onto and favoring more cloud-based solutions. How has this impacted security, based on obviously your experience dealing with a lot of customers, even from having a data center and being involved in managed operations? How has this affected risk and impacted security?
Thank you, Trevor, and thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, so undoubtedly over the last few years, cloud has made technology much more accessible to organizations of any size. So organizations can now consume technology as a service, technology that perhaps in the past was not necessarily available to them, or maybe overly complex for them to implement. This ability to consume technology as a service has basically created or enabled these organizations to be much more agile. In what sense? I mean, in many senses, not just technology-wise, but let's think about how today, we can enable a more hybrid and a more mobile workforce, and not just from the perspective of, the post-pandemic perk of letting employees work at home, but even, having access to a wider pool of talent that, you can employ people that are located overseas and not necessarily incur the cost and hassle of having to relocate them. Now, what has this ultimately caused? It has caused an extension of the organization boundaries from the traditional brick-and-mortar office network environment, where the emphasis there from a security perspective was how do we ensure that people that are at the office can access services, but obviously people that are out can't, or at most can do so, in a very controlled manner. To a model where, because technology now, systems and data are deployed on the cloud, employees can work from anywhere. How do we protect that environment? It obviously becomes much more complicated. The boundaries are almost global, and it requires a shift in mindset, I think, in terms of how you approach security. Not just about protecting, I repeat, not just about protecting the perimeter, the network perimeter, but really looking at a wider environment that one needs to protect.
And in terms of the solutions and the technology that companies are going for in protecting their environments, again, I suppose the move onto these cloud setups has changed the sort of investment that they're going for, right? What sort of tools are companies going for as a result of this shift?
As I said, so in the past, I would say it was more about network perimeter security, right? Firewalls and other network security solutions that would be deployed, ultimately to keep unauthorized access out. And then, of course, anti-malware solutions to make sure that sort of people don't get in through the back door and don't access our data or infect our environment from the back door. today I think the focus is on user identity, right? Because systems and data can be accessed from anywhere and any device because they're hosted in the cloud. And ultimately the entry point is the user identity. Okay, now protecting the user identity has multiple aspects, and obviously there are multiple technologies that allow us to do that. A simple thing would be multi-factor authentication. That's probably a typical best practice that we're all now used to. You know, if we log into our online banking bank account, we would use multi-factor authentication. But then there are much more sophisticated tools that help us identify or prevent attacks, intrusion detection systems, you know, that serve as kind of early warning and help us react much better. Because I think a crux that we all need to also understand is that protecting the entire environment is probably an impossible task. So it is also about how prepared and quick you are to react to a potential security breach.
Thank you. Thank you. I move to you, Conrad. So your experiences within the gaming industry, right? And working within the IT and the cybersecurity department. Obviously, very often you play a very important role in the company's ability to meet certain compliance requirements. What are the challenges or typical challenges that you would face in having to address all these different requirements and compliance requirements? And actually, we've asked this question yesterday as well and we looked at it from the banking side, but from a technology side and from a more of a hands-on approach, what would be the challenges?
Thank you, Trevor. First of all, one has to consider that practically all these different companies in the gaming industry operate in different jurisdictions. So apart from security standards like PCI DSS, security frameworks like NIST and ISO 27001, you have jurisdictional requirements, security-related requirements. So that adds a certain complexity. So the first thing I would say, and I'm speaking from a high level, is look at the business exigencies. What is your acceptable risk? What is the profile of the company? There's no one size fits all. And that also is different per jurisdiction. For example, North America, we have a different risk profile to Europe, to Spain, for example, or to Sweden, or to the UK, and also in North America in the different jurisdictions. Delving in, then one has to see, I spoke about acceptable risk, about user experience. So, although you have different requirements and to satisfy, to what level are you going to satisfy these requirements? For example, Nick mentioned identity and access management, which prevails throughout the discussion today. So there, what are you going to push forward? Are you going to ask for a certain exception? Maybe because your other competitors have also asked that. You don't want to have more stringent requirements, especially when you're working with end users who might have a certain limited level of knowledge and want to actually access your site as soon as possible, or as move to a different site of a different organization. I would also speak about resource prioritization in this case, because with regards to satisfying the different requirements and standards, there's a certain amount of resources you need. The resources are always limited, resources could be shared, so what you need is to find synergies between your different standards, frameworks, requirements, and where you have things that are required across the board. You know, you'll be able to ask them once, for example, or gather the evidence in advance. In that context also, have a compliance calendar. Now, previously from experience, we used to have these compliance highs and troughs, but nowadays you will notice once you do the calendar that there's a certain streamlining of these across the year, and you just have certain highs, which are the actual audits you know well enough. So it's good to prepare in advance. At the same time, by complying to these different standards and requirements, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It does not equate to the company having an actual security posture. It attests its security posture. But for example, SolarWinds, you've heard of the SolarWinds breach. These were ISO 27001 and SOC 2 type 1 and type 2 certified. And people were asking, well, what's wrong here? But you have to see that the auditor comes in, has to work on what he or she finds and report that. So you don't just rely on your adhering to the frameworks and the standards, but also having a continual cycle of alignment and adherence to different requirements.
Yeah, and there's actually puts more importance on the term we use, that it's compliance should not just be looked at as a tick box exercise, because at the end of the day, cybersecurity is actually more important than compliance. Talking about challenges, Sergio, you are coming from a retail background, right? And you have a responsibility. Probably your biggest challenge is making sure that your retail stores stay up and running, right? You even operate some high-profile brands like Marks and Spencer, so availability to you is a big concern. So, in this respect, what would be the challenges you face?
Thank you, Trevor. Thanks for the opportunity. It's really diverse now. So the challenges are becoming bigger and bigger in the sense that whereas up to a few years back, retail was purely you have a shops, whatever, and you have control of your entry points. Nowadays, we're talking courier service, we're talking e-com, synchronizations to server A to supplier B. So the challenges there are, first and foremost, to ensure that your network is secured, your data is secured, but also your partners. So ensuring that with whom you're dealing have the appropriate security measures, which could result obviously in issues, coming towards your systems. I think it's key. So one would need to vet with whom you are operating. You operate with reputable organizations. So obviously coming also from a physical, the typical retail stores would go into network downtime. Then power, it could be a security breach. Now security breaches, I mentioned internal security breaches, but external security breaches are an ongoing attack, and I think it affects all industries, not just the retail industry. It's just the possibility is, in the way I see it, that the value of our data may be not as valuable as a banking organization, but then again there is customer data. So, conforming with GDPR and other regulations with regards to customer data, one needs to make sure that if you're operating, your data is secured to the best of your knowledge, and that's when obviously certain things like pen testing and all this comes in.
Absolutely. And in fact, you mentioned the risks that you face, and it's obviously not just you. Yesterday, in our conversation, we also spoke about how ransomware, phishing attacks, social engineering keep making the headlines, right? In fact, I think recent reports show that about 25% of all the attacks had some form of were related to these types of attacks, right? Malware in general, and this keeps happening. So, Conrad, in the face of all this, these types of threats, again from a technical perspective, how are IT departments mitigating these threats, and pretty much are they succeeding?
So, first of all, you always have the different lines of defense. Your anti-malware, advanced threat detection response solutions in place. But apart from that, you need to be proactive. So proactive threat intelligence, where you have your staff or you are in collaboration groups. For example, the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK has the different task forces that different sectors like iGaming, like we are part of, and we get certain intelligence being shared between different organisations. You have the ransomware task force, which the NSA and the UK National Cybersecurity Centre are working on and disseminating information to different people. Then you have the different threat advisories. These all provide a basis for knowledge of what is being faced out there. So threat intelligence is vital, whether you have a small department, whether you have a larger force to work with. Obviously, there's the question of people, so social engineering, particularly phishing, but there's also phishing and smishing, is always one of the main sources of entry for ransomware, malware, the like. So training of your staff, because the people are the weakest line of defense, but they could also be the strongest line. So training programs and training awareness programs like phishing awareness sessions, where people receive an email and have to actually click to indicate that they realize it's a phishing attempt, you know. If not, you have stats of the common offenders or the top offenders, and you put them on a training program. Nothing wrong in that. So that is important. You also have the question of patching and vulnerability management. Now, here I want to mention two things. Recently, there was an article, there was a study actually by a company called Carbon Black, where they noticed that 47 Windows drivers out there, Windows drivers coming in Windows actually are vulnerable to full remote takeover. So these are different vulnerable drivers which are used in different applications, 47. I will mention another case, a recent case, a few months back, where 22 Danish companies in the energy sector were actually the recipients of different breaches, whether it was to affect their critical infrastructure, whether to use them as part of the Mirai botnet, basically to perform DDoS attacks. So basically, you have remote entry and use these as a way to attack places in Hong Kong and US, different entities. And the source of entry were a type of brand of firewalls. I won't mention the brand. It's not an enterprise brand, but mostly known for home. But in Denmark, it's quite popular with these companies. And these actually issued certain zero-day updates, which were against the cost. So companies either decided not to update their firewalls, or they assumed that by buying a new version of the new hardware of this firewall, they would have the update on, and they did not collaborate between themselves. So this is where collaboration comes, and it was a whole mess. This was actually in Denmark around April, May, June. So that's another example I wanted to put. With regards to malware, ransomware, an incident response plan is important. So, we had put an incident response plan, a policy, which also had a ransomware plan in the index. And the reason why is that ransomware has to be tackled differently. You have things like backup plans, and you always need your backup and restore plans in place. But things like ransomware, you need that. You need third parties who can use to actually engage for negotiation, because ransomware, unlike malware, normally involves a negotiation, and that would be beyond. You need also parts within the company to provide communication with the company, and also maybe engage a third party to perform external PR. That's something which is quite overlooked.
Yeah, again, I'm happy to hear mention of a lot of terms. Again, we mentioned them yesterday as well, but they're extremely important, like the incident response. Not just an incident response plan, but an actual working incident response plan. So that's extremely important. Sergio, you mentioned before the number of endpoints that you have and trying to secure all these different connections, let's say. How important would something like a penetration test be to your organization?
I think pen testing is highly important. I mean, a routine, biannual, an annual routine pen test, I think it's highly essential. It is a must in any organization. As you grow, as an organization grows, the risks are growing. As technology evolves, the risks are growing. As you open up to different partners, the risks are growing. So I think that scheduled pen tests are highly important. However, I won't stop there. I think that also there are cases where your scheduled pen test is up in 2 months' time, but you did a firewall upgrade yesterday. That may open up to breaches, or a patch management has been updated, Windows updates, for example. And that's where you need to ensure that if there is at least a shred of doubt, I think you need to ensure that you carry out the necessary pen testing. Pen testing in the sense of networking is important, obviously, but one needs to also to consider what systems you're using, what operating systems you're using. So your software, maybe there's a breach in your software, which would not be detected by your firewall, possibly, but maybe your software is sending data to different places that you're unaware of. So I think pen testing is highly important, but it needs to be coupled with a number of other security measures within the organization. Again, education to your staff is one of the key things. A lot of breaches have happened because of internal misuse or a lack of understanding of the security. So pen testing coupled with all these is important, and I think it's any company willing to protect, because there is at times, I mean, maybe in the smaller type of organization, security is not maybe considered as a high priority. Bigger organizations who have an understanding of the security risks out there would be willing to carry out these pen tests.
Nick, you deal with both large clients and other, let's say, smaller ones. A similar question to you in terms of penetration testing. I think you'd agree that penetration testing is a very important tool for the IT department, the information security department. How important is it, and are there any other tools that complement or potentially add more value than the pen test itself? Again, when considering new technologies, artificial intelligence possibly, and all that stuff, is the pen test still one of the best things to protect your environment?
So I think reinforcing on the points that both Conrad and Sergio earlier made, from our perspective as BM, I think now I want to talk about us as a service provider, but also us as ultimately an operator of a critical IT environment, right? We look at cybersecurity or cyber resilience, I prefer to call it, along 4 pillars, 4 dimensions, right? The first is really understanding that you're not immune, and understanding what your current posture is. Now, certainly, pen testing is a fundamental tool, as Sergio already explained, that aids in really understanding where the organization is at in terms of its current levels of vulnerability and what it needs to do to be able to address them. Nonetheless, I think a broader assessment, right, that follow standards. I think Conrad mentioned them, like NIST or ISO or others, helps look at things not just from a technology perspective, but also from a process perspective, right? And so I think that is all a much more structured. Of course, pen testing is an element which contributes to that. The third part, which was also mentioned, is employee awareness, right? I mean, you can have the best pen test and the best response to that pen test. You can have the best assessment and the best mitigation, but if your employees bypass any form of security process, or even sometimes maybe some common sense, then it's all for nothing. So awareness, and even Conrad mentioned this, tools and processes that not just educate and train. Many times in the past we just define policies, and the policies are there, everybody's expected to read and understand them, but in truth few follow them. But even simulating, for example, a phishing attack or a social engineering threat, that is a way of trying to understand, whether the company or whether the employees are prepared, what the response is, and then targets training accordingly. So that is the first dimension. The second dimension is, of course, to protect the environment, right? Again, we've mentioned the number of technologies here, from the traditional ones to maybe the more modern ones, which also, yes, use AI to make things more effective, because the truth is there are so many threats, and the whole environment is evolving so much that it's hard for humans to keep up. So sourcing information from third parties, having solutions that actually use this information to help us understand where our vulnerabilities are and how we can address them, I think is also a vital part. The third part is to be proactive, to be proactive through process, ensuring, that some common sense things like regular patching, updating, deploying a new firewall. I don't know who of my colleagues mentioned this, but not necessarily having the latest updates applied to them. That should be followed on a routine basis. And even if you come back to pen testing, doing a pen test once every so often is good in itself. Having it more of a regular discipline in the organization. Now, you can't be doing pen testing every single day, but having it a more regular aspect obviously strengthens the posture. And then ultimately, I think the fourth dimension goes back to what I mentioned before, which is nobody's immune. We need to understand and accept that. And the crux, and yes, we can, or there are customers that might take the approach that, who's going to target me, or I'm too small to be an eventual target. But we have seen smaller companies be targeted of a ransomware attack, and which caused havoc. I know one local which basically lost their data for 3 months. They didn't know who owed them money and who they owed money to, because they lost access to their financial accounting information. At any rate, so having a well-thought plan. It's not just a plan, but it's an executable plan. I think you were saying that, Trent. In terms of how you respond to attacks, having appropriate business continuity measures. In the case of ransomware, what are you going to do? Do you negotiate? To what level do you negotiate with the cyber criminals? And recently I was at an event, and there was some interesting insights shared with us where it's probably more accepted that you do negotiate, because ultimately it is a way of minimizing the impact on your organization. So those are the 4 dimensions that we advise customers to be looking at. And as I said, it is also a framework we use internally, not just for our own IT, but operating a data center environment for which hosts around 250 customers. Your ISO certified, we're PCI certified, so we have to follow certain procedures, and we have to implement certain security measures, also because our customers mandate it.
Very good.
We spoke about a lot of things. We didn't mention yet. We didn't go into the software, the web applications mostly. Konrad, in your experience, from the point of view of securing and making applications secure, what is being done? Again, in your experience, especially in the gaming industry, there's a lot of software being published almost on an ongoing basis. What controls are being put in place to make sure that what goes out in production is actually secure as much as it can be?
So, first of all, this is quite a complex subject because it's not just your app developers, and developers are central to most gaming companies who actually develop their own gaming platforms and so forth, or actually deal with third parties, but also third parties. And third parties, not only third parties who actually plug in the games and applications, but things like third party scripts and libraries. One example, British Airways had a major breach. I think it was 18 million that they got fined 18 million in 2018, and that was through a third-party payment script. So this is one thing. Let's go back to the central point. So the proactive way to tackle this is to have security embedded at every step of your development. So you have your secure development life cycle. So you have the development paradigm. You need assistance from the security-related teams, and this is where we have the rise actually of the discipline called DevSecOps, where you have DevOps, people who are basically production engineers who actually recommend or implement security initiatives within the pipeline. Within the developers, training is central. So training on secure coding practices, this is a basis of recommendation 6 of PCI DSS, but it's also found in other standards and frameworks, is vital. So it's not just on secure coding, but also knowledge on different parts of the whole application, which is important. So ongoing training is important in that context. With regards to applications, then there are the different testing approaches. There's the DAST and SAS, so static application testing, manual code review, or automated and dynamic application testing. That also comes in. But ultimately, this is about people, about handling third parties, and seeing that third party libraries are actually secured. You have cases where you have things put up in GitHub, and they are on public GitHub. We've seen that accidentally, but then it could cause certain issues. You could have third-party libraries which are not being updated, or which have issues. So this is the whole complex environment. To navigate this, you need continual communication between the different sections.
In terms of cybersecurity, you juggle a lot of tasks on a daily basis, managing systems, and user support, and a bunch of other things. Do you manage to do all of this internally, or do you have to seek outside help in terms of getting all of what needs to be done on time and in the best possible way?
Yes, I mean, it gets a bit hectic with projects, with the ongoing user support, and however, apart from that, when you're talking about the internal security, I think there is an element of internal security that should be done, which is the daily ensuring that, I mean, to a certain element of pen test, possibly a smaller pen test, an internal pen test, backups, ensuring your backups are in place, the ongoing maintenance, and ensuring that to the level that you can control, you are protected. However, I think it's crucial actually to have an unbiased pen test from outside your company, because like that you are not just getting a pen test which is I mean, you may know your systems, but an expert pen tester will definitely, he's an expert in that field. So an individual can't be an expert in all sectors. I highly think that people who are experienced and do this on an ongoing basis for a living are definitely going to find something that you may have overseen. So external support, I think it's required when it comes to pen testing. As I said, you get a different view from an unbiased individual or organization to carry out that check for you.
Thank you. That's all the time we had for this session. Guys, that was very interesting. I wish we had more time to keep going. Thank you very much for your contribution. Our beers are getting warm, so cheers to...
Cheers and thank you.